Hello. I
Hi.
was clicking around too much, hitting live on two different places, and then clicked our banner more than once. And now, okay, we're here.
Thanks for bringing us here, Kimberly. You're our little like tech person in the
I'm
mornings.
trying.
I do graphics, you do tech.
Yeah, barely.
But here we are, and welcome
Here
to
we
that
are.
Vegan
Yay,
Morning
we're
Show.
live. Yeah, I'm Kimberly.
And I'm Jen.
And
We
this is
kind of
that Vegan
reversed
Morning
this.
Show. We're going to figure it out. Good
We
morning,
will.
Richard.
Good
Thank
morning,
you so much
Richard.
for being
Welcome.
here.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I think we function pretty well for 7 a.m.
I think so.
every Monday. So before
Yeah.
we dive into this very big topic we have, how was your weekend, Kimberly?
My weekend was pretty good. What did I even do? Oh no. I always try to come prepared with what I did on the weekend and now over the weekend. And
Well, what did you do
oh,
for
well, I
Mother's
went to
Day?
see my mom, yes, Saturday. I went to
Oh,
my
nice.
parents' house and so for Mother's Day cuz my mom worked yesterday. So I went to see her on Saturday. So that was really nice. Um and yeah, I don't Yesterday, I worked on the podcast. The podcast season 6 of Did You Bring the Hummus went live today, this morning at 6
Ooh.
a.m. Eastern. Thank you very much. It was a bit delayed, but I got there. And so that's out for people to listen to. How was your weekend, Jen?
Well, first of all, that's really cool because I know you've been working on this for a really long time.
Yeah,
And you did get there. I'm
I
looking forward
did.
to listening to it later.
Thank you.
And you know what? I feel like it's all about the showing up, right? Sometimes it takes a little bit. Like, look, the show took us a while to get up than
It
we
did.
originally.
Also, my doing.
Yeah, but moving, selling a house, not the easiest things in the world.
No.
But my weekend was actually more jam-packed than normal. Friday night we went to a comedy show that really wasn't that great, but it's still
Oh.
entertaining. Then Saturday I had a leftover amount on a gift certificate my husband got me for a for massage. So I got a massage, which was great.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
then we did a hike at the oh my God, I can't remember. I posted it on my Instagram and now the name of the place is like it's blanking out. But it was a nice Japanese garden. If you go on my Instagram, you'll see what it's called. And then we joined this like local meetup group. They do fun events. And we went to this pottery place and I painted this like pineapple dish. It was fun.
Nice.
And then Sunday we drove to Brooklyn to see my in-laws. And yeah, and here I am.
Awesome. Sounds like a great weekend. And good morning, Justinas. Thanks for joining us. We're glad you're here.
Christina, it's nice to see you live with us this morning. Yeah, so enough about our weekends. We have a show that I think is going to have to go into a part 2.
I think so too. There's just so much. So as we chat this morning, as always, please put your thoughts and questions into the chat, into the comments. We'd love to have everyone engaged in the conversation.
Absolutely. So Kimberly, do you want to kick things off with this?
Sure. Yeah. So this conversation was really inspired by the Met Gala that happened just like not even a week ago.
Yeah.
And and I see the photos and I love that there are themes and that it's always like who can be the most in the theme or have the most impressive outfit. And then I look at what they're actually wearing and I am horrified. I'm horrified by the leather, by the feathers, by the shells and everything else that they kind of use to adorn or make the clothing from. And I actually always felt, and I'll admit I hadn't looked up the purpose of the Met Gala until we decided to have this episode. So I was always just like, oh my gosh, this is so opulent. Like, couldn't this money be used in a better way? And I still think that maybe we don't need to spend as much money as they do on the outfits and the showing up. could we just maybe donate? Because the Met Gala, the purpose of it is a fundraiser for the costume department of the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. And the reason why they need a fundraiser is because they are the only self-funded department in the Metropolitan Museum.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got to be funded some way in order to maintain the costumes, in order to have different exhibitions, that's the word I was looking for, and to be able to maintain what they have in their collection. And I love art in all forms, and fashion absolutely is an art. So I don't want to take away from that. I'm just thinking there are better ways for us to show up. And I think that wherever we can, we should be pushing for the Met Gala to become a vegan place where we can showcase and donate money to the department, but also to showcase the beauty of fashion that isn't harming anyone else.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And yeah, I am also very passionate about art and freedom of expression. I think it's very, very important. Um, but we can also do these things in a cruelty-free way.
Mhm.
Especially now, we know better. There's other materials that can be used
Yeah.
now for this. And, there was a lot of feathered costumes or, outfits that were worn in the Met Gala. And I saw PETA had did a post last week about it. And I, I know where feathers come from, but it's one of those things I never did a deep dive on because it's not something I
Mhm.
think about too often because I don't wear feathery things.
Right.
But it was just, it made me really sad
Mhm.
reading about how birds are having their feathers pulled out of them. Like, imagine having your hair pulled out of you.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
how would that feel?
Yeah.
Right? So they're going through this. They're being held down and being, having their feathers pulled out. And it's really horrifying reading about these things. And there's ways, that you can have feathers made that are synthetic now.
Mhm.
So why aren't we doing that instead?
Yeah. That is an excellent question, and I wish more people in the fashion industry would ask themselves that. Um, as far as the Met Gala goes, Lewis Hamilton has made me sad again.
Oh
So Lewis
no.
Hamilton's a Formula One driver who is very vocal about being vegan, which is amazing, and I love that. I I can't imagine that there are tons of vegans within the racing community, whether it's NASCAR, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe whether it's NASCAR or Formula One. But so Lewis Hamilton really is a voice, and a lot of people really like him, not just because he's such a good racer, but he also is very fashionable. He's always dressed to the nines, as they say, right? And he seems like a nice guy. But last summer, he was on vacation in Egypt and he rode camels and he posted photos. And when the vegans were like, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" He didn't respond. So that was super disappointing. And
Mhm.
then at the Met Gala, and the theme this year was black dandyism. So it or black dandy. So it was like this, so what he wore was within that theme, and it honored some African cultures, and I'm all for that. I don't want to make it sound like I don't think that people should be honoring different cultures around the world, because I absolutely do.
Mhm.
But within his outfit, he had these shells, and the name of the shells are escaping me, but did I write it down? Cowrie shells, Cowrie.
I've
They
never
are
heard of those.
gorgeous. Yeah, I've seen them. I'd never
Mhm.
heard of them before. I didn't know their name. But they are seen as like an almost an amulet of protection in many African cultures. And they really are so beautiful. They're either white or they're like spotted. And he had cowrie shells, on his, I think on his jacket. But they are mollusks. They are living beings. And
Mhm.
because their shells are so beautiful, people just scoop them up out of the water and, then they become jewelry. You could get necklaces and bracelets made from them. But they are living beings, and get this, they mate for life.
Really?
Yeah. So, I know some people who think that those who live within shells in the ocean can't possibly have sentience or uh, an experience of life, but I don't know. Like, it kind of seems like they do. And who am I to judge that anyway? So I was really disappointed that he didn't just include fake ones as a representation of that culture, um, because he is vegan and he is so vocal about it. And then he kind of shows up sometimes and he's doing things that are not in alignment, which we all do. And we have examples, real life examples, right? Of when we're like, oh, I didn't know that. But then there never seems to be a follow up of like, I didn't know that. Hey guys, guess what I just learned? Here's why, people brought it to my attention and now I'm not going to do that anymore. And I think that is a key. Um, yeah.
I have a lot to say on all of this.
Good.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And I love that we went and we did our different explorations on this topic, because I feel like it's
Mhm.
going to bring different things, and I'm so glad you did this research, more so on what the Met Gala was and what's behind it, but also what's his name again? I'm not familiar.
Oh yeah, Lewis Hamilton.
Lewis Hamilton.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think he's like an example of like other vegans we've talked about before, right? Where maybe they're vegan for the food part,
Mm,
right? And first of all, it's great when people are vocal and they're in the mainstream and they have a platform. So I don't want to take away from that, because the more because you don't think about car racers
right.
and veganism. So the
Yeah.
fact that he's even putting that out there is amazing.
Mhm.
But again, are you technically vegan? Because,
Right.
or are you plant-based? Or, because then again, the vegan piece is ethics everywhere. So there's
Mhm.
that part. The other part that came to me is I did a lot of reading about pearls. And
Mm.
also the same thing comes up about, do they really have feelings? And who are we to determine what something's life is like? And I took some notes on pearls. I was reading on PETA and some other websites. And just to explain, so pearls naturally form in only 1 in 10,000 oysters, because the
Wow.
creation of a pearl can take up to 3 years.
Mm.
So pearl farmers have devised a process called culturing
Mhm.
or cultivating that allows them to exploit oysters faster and cheaper. So during culturing, farmers pry open oyster shells and insert an irritant, often a bead or another oyster's mollusk tissue. And
Mm.
then when oysters sense danger, they try to hide inside their shells, snapping them tightly shut. Having their protective shells pried open by humans is presumably frightening and a painful experience. While we don't know yet whether bivalves can feel pain in the same way we do, we can observe that oysters snap their shells tightly shut when they're disturbed by touch or even when they sense loud noises. Their response indicates an understanding of the potential danger if their shell is pried open, especially since the process commonly results in the death of half the oysters. So here's another thing about pearls. So there's something called pearl powder that can be used in cosmetics. And then there are there are fake pearls out there, but some of those pearls can actually have pearl powder or other non-vegan ingredients.
Mm.
And so that's the piece on that. And then I have one other layer to add that came to me from yours, and then I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Yeah.
So speaking about not knowing things until you know them, and I shared this with you this morning before we got on live. I found a website called getitvegan.com, which I'm going to be going crazy over later, just to like, not crazy, but really wanting to educate myself more on things you don't normally think about as being vegan. And they list brands and stuff. So I feel like this is going to be a great resource. And me and Kimberly are going to include all the links in the notes afterwards. So if
Mhm.
you watch the replay or if you're watching us live and you want to go back and find the resources that we used, we'll do that. So in my research, I was reading about makeup and they were talking about cruelty-free versus vegan. And cruelty-free refers to testing methods and vegan refers to origin of the ingredients. And it made me stop and think. And then I was like, oh no. I have a lot of products that are do say vegan, but then I also have products that are cruelty free. And in my head, I was like, oh, cruelty free means vegan. No, it doesn't.
Mm-mm.
And I'm sharing this embarrassing story because I want to, again, it ties in also with what you were sharing, right?
Yeah.
And and also it goes about intention, right? My intention has been to eliminate animal products and do the best I can to not have things that have been tested on animals.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, so you can have something that's not tested on animals, but it could still have honey, pearl powder, other type gelatin, other types of, there's a really lengthy list of things.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I'm going to be today going through and changing some products that maybe could also be vegan, but I do not have the time in a day to
Mhm.
go item by item of every
Right.
little thing that's in there. So anyway, I just wanted to share all of that. So everything you just shared made me think of all these things.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And I think it is an important learning to be shared so that other vegans will be like, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that," and not feel shamed by it or that, they should have known better. Like when we know better, we do better. So,
Yeah.
now you've shared the resource where everyone watching this can now do better. So thank you for that. I
Yeah.
wanted to go back to when you were discussing about the oysters and how it was kind of framed like we don't know for sure if bivalves feel pain the way we do. And then anytime I hear that, because I've heard that before from other people will say like, but if you're vegan, like you can eat bivalves because they don't feel pain. So they're not sentient the way other beings are. And my thought is, okay, what if they don't feel pain like we do? What if they feel pain like an oyster feels pain?
Oh,
What
I
if they
love that.
experience fear like an oyster experiences fear? And so that right there is enough for me to say I
Yeah.
would not eat an oyster because I don't know what an oyster's fear or pain feels like, but it doesn't matter to me that I don't know that. The fact that they could is enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Um,
it's kind of like you don't know what anybody's experience is like
yeah.
except they're experiencing it the way they're experiencing it. That's
Mhm.
unique to them. And so I
Yeah.
really love how you're shedding light on that. That's a really great way of thinking about it.
Thank you. Yeah. Hmm. Um, Going back to the Met Gala too. So I know I've kind of given Lewis Hamilton a hard time, but I am very thankful that he is vegan and that he is vocal. And I hope that as he makes these faux pas, if you will, that he does actually do what you've done and go, oh, okay, learning opportunity. Let me make a change. So he certainly was not the worst offender. Diana Ross was covered in feathers. Sabrina
Yes.
Carpenter wore two different fur coats. And I saw a lot of people defending her. Oh, it's faux fur. And I learned from watching this documentary, Slay, that there are faux fur coats out there that look pretty convincing, but she has not come out and said, yes, my coat is faux fur. And I think anyone who wears faux fur would be motivated to say, it's not real, I promise. Like, and I haven't seen, and please, viewers, correct me if she has announced, yes, I was wearing, a faux fur coat, but I haven't seen that. But she was in these two giant fur coats, and the sadness that comes over me when I think of the number of animals. And in the documentary Slay, which everyone should watch, is so good. They do give some numbers. In an average coat made from chinchilla, there are 300 chinchillas that are murdered in order to be made into a coat. For a mink coat, the average is 60, and for a fox coat, it's anywhere between 15 and 40 foxes.
That just makes me so sad, because as you're reading that, I'm like seeing their little faces in my head, right? And this is why we're committed vegans, because we're looking at them as an identity and not just the commodity. I have another material. You're reading your numbers made me think of another material. So I was reading up on silk, and let me just pull up my notes on that. I tried to be very organized and broke everything down by
Good. My notes are all over the place.
It's right at the top. I scrolled past it. It was right at the top. So, and I got this from a PETA article, which we'll include the link. So silk is the fiber that silkworms weave to make cocoons. The so-called silkworm is actually a domesticated insect who in nature goes through the same stages of metamorphosis as moths do. So egg, larval, pupal, and adult. So silk is derived from the cocoons of the larva. So most of the insects raised by the industry don't live past the pupal stage, as they are steamed or gassed alive inside their cocoons. And here's the sad number. Approximately 3,000 silkworms die to make every pound of silk.
Wow. So
when you were sharing that about the fur, and again, right, people think, oh, it's an insect. Oh, well, but who are we? It's still a sentient being, right? Mm-hmm. It has their whole process of transformation. And here this poor creature is going from a worm trying to become a moth, and it gets steamed or gassed alive to be someone's fancy material.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of horrific ways to die, so fur, it's very important that the pelt, as they call it, the fur and the skin that the fur is attached to, is not damaged in the process. So many of these animals are kept in very small cages for their whole short life at fur farms, or they're trapped out in the wild, which is a whole other horrific thing. But when they are killed, most often they are electrocuted.
Oh my God.
So that their fur is not damaged. So they are the electrocution happens where their one side is put into their rectum and the other through their mouth, and then they are essentially burned from the inside. This way the whole fur can be used and isn't lost. And in the documentary Slay, and I don't want to give away too much, but there's so much good stuff in there. They do talk about fur trappers, and that there are thousands of traps out there, so many that very often the fur trappers will even forget where they've put them. There's often, as in the fishing industry, there's a bycatch who die that are not intended to be the caught animal. It's the same with fur trapping. And there is a very often, if an animal does escape the trap, it's because they've chewed off whatever part of their body is attached to the trap. And this is also someone can just wear their body, wear their fur. And we have so many other great alternatives. Now, I know that in the documentary they talk to someone who does create very realistic looking faux fur. And it is very luxurious, and it was very impressive. For me, I would never wear faux fur because I would never want to send the message to someone who is just walking by me that it's
Mhm.
acceptable to wear fur. It's the same way I don't wear like a faux leather jacket, because I don't want to send that message. But with the fur, I've always been really like mindful of that. And just quickly, throughout when the documentary starts, the woman, Rebecca Capelli, who is the main person going through, and she was the producer and kind of the creator of everything. She talks about how, you know, she was in the fashion industry, and every piece of clothing in her closet had some kind of animal in it, whether it was their skins, whether it was a silk blouse, whether it was their fur. And she said, at one point, when I was a little girl, I had bunnies as pets and I loved them. How did I grow up to be a woman who wore them?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's deep, and it's like what we've talked about before, like, um, eating, like one of our very early episodes, it might have been our first one, talking about cognitive dissonance, right?
Mhm.
And how when I was on vacation, there was a local chicken place that was a popular chain that was holding a children's book event, and it was stories about chickens,
Mhm.
and here these kids are reading these cute stories about chickens, and then they're eating chicken, right? And
Mhm.
so it kind of ties in with that, right? There's that cognitive dissonance there that people aren't thinking, and it's really, really sad. And and this episode might be more of a downer than our other episodes, but we felt we felt it was really important because
Yeah.
and that's one of the things that me and Kimberly have talked about with this show, is if there's things that are in the news, we want to talk about them through the vegan lens.
Mhm.
And sometimes that can be uncomfortable, but it's also very important because being a vegan in a non-vegan world can be a very uncomfortable
Yeah.
experience. And before we run out of time, I wanted to just touch on another material.
Yeah.
Um, that I was reading about that people may not think about. Like, I knew this, but again, it's like you give something another name, right? And then you don't think about it. But down, for example,
Mhm.
is feathers,
Yeah.
right? And it's a soft layer of feathers that's closest to a bird's skin. And PETA did an expose because there are places or facilities that are certified responsible companies, and how, supposedly how they treat the animals, for harvesting the down. But there was unsanitary conditions and horrific violence that was still happening in these places. And so, again, why do we need, you know, feathers, and why do we have to do these to these poor animals? And who are we to judge what someone's suffering is like? Because this is something that is living and is going through very unnecessary suffering.
Yeah. Absolutely. And for when you hear from people like, well, like, why do you care so much about animals? What about the people? And just like in the food industry, the people who work in slaughterhouses and factory farms also are suffering in different ways.
Yeah.
So are people involved in the fashion industry. The tanneries alone. So, you have to treat an animal's skin so it doesn't rot so people can wear their skins, right? So you can't just skin a cow and then turn that immediately into a shoe. You have to treat it, and it goes through they call it tanning the hide, right? And it goes through this very heavily chemical process that these people are exposed to all day long while they're working,
Yeah.
and they use very heavy machinery. So not only are these employees at risk of whatever it is they're breathing in and all of those respiratory diseases that can come, they're also at risk of being physically injured by the machines themselves. So there is suffering all the way around, people and animals alike. Some more than others, obviously, but when we when people give us a hard time about caring only about the animals, if we stop doing these awful, horrific things to them, the people who are engaged in those industries, who are doing that awful, sad work, will also stop suffering. There are tons of human rights violations within the fashion industry. Growing up, I remember hearing about child labor all of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So if we can come up with a new way, a kinder way for everyone, like this, it's just like why not? And there's so many great alternatives, and we definitely do need a second show, because I want to talk about stuff made out of mushrooms and apples and pineapple,
Yes,
and
I was reading
it's
all
so
about that.
incredible.
So you know what? Maybe that can be our part two
Yeah.
about that. And I just wanted to say, just to touch on what you were saying, about humans. Also, I as vegans and all the other vegans I have spoken to, I feel like because we care about animals and suffering in general, we also care about how we treat our fellow man and our
Mhm.
fellow woman, our fellow human, right?
Yep.
How we treat other humans. Uh, it starts by what we put on our plate, what we wear, and other types of things. And when we're being mindful and conscious about how we're treating animals, that has a ripple effect on
Mhm.
humanity and
Yep.
how we treat other people and just
Mhm.
being more empathetic humans. So
Yeah.
I can't believe we're at
Over
7:33.
time.
Wow. And yeah, this was a heavier discussion than we normally have, but I think it was also very important because
Yeah.
again, the mission of this channel is to talk about news and just everything, all things
Mhm.
vegan, right?
Yep.
Through the vegan lens. And
Yeah.
sometimes that can be very sad, but there's also very happy things.
Mhm.
And next week we're going to have a happier show, which
Yeah.
everyone will see next week when
Mhm.
we won't promote that, but we're going to have a fun guest on,
Yeah.
and we'll announce that later in the week. So tune in.
Mhm.
But yeah, anything else? Oh, we just got a comment before we
Yeah.
wrap up. Thank you for bringing all this to light. It's so important to remember and reflect on these things. Thank you, Justinas.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, and that's what we want people to think about. Just think and be more mindful about it. And sometimes it's hard
Yeah.
to think about these things, but if we turn away and we don't, then they're going to keep happening.
Mhm.
So it's so important. So yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in now. Yeah, was there anything else you wanted to say, Kimberly, before we wrap up?
No, I think that was a great way to wrap up.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for watching, who tuned in with us live. And if you're watching the replay, put in the comments below replay where you're watching from, your comments, your likes, your subscription, or subscriptions,
Yeah.
all of it. Subscribe to the channel, share the channel. It's going to help us with our algorithm. It's going to help us grow our audience and help support our mission in supporting all things vegan.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you.
We have a beautiful week, everyone. Bye for now.